It's really good, but it could be so much better. I don't think it's anywhere as close to the quality game as we had 15 years ago, 20 years ago. The game was better. We shouldn't be able to say that. We're not saying that about college football or the NBA or Major League Baseball, anything like that. Our game has suffered. And, you hear people say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, that's stupid. Nobody says if it ain't broke, don't maintain it. And scoring has consistently gone down to the point that this year it's at its lowest point in 50 years. And it's been going down and down and down and down. And what do we want to blame that on the players? We've got a trend here, and we're not doing anything to fix it. We're not taking the shot clock down from 35, which makes us the longest, slowest game in the world. We're not taking the shot clock down. Women's game is faster than our game. And we're not doing anything about the shot clock. We don't do anything about the foul situation. We don't do anything about the charge block or the charge block circle and take it back out. We're not doing anything that the NBA does when they have a better game and everybody admits it. We're not doing it. And it's not that hard. We could make these changes and the game would be better. We have the best environments by far. We have the best environments. Those are built in. If we make the game better, the environments will actually get better. Hard to imagine they could get better, but the environments will get better. Right now, the environments are basically all we have.
I'm all about kids getting an opportunity to achieve their dream. But this whole one-and-done thing, I think it really hurts. It hurts the game because you don't get a chance to associate with the brand. If a kid stays in school for 2-3 years, then all of a sudden you have a brand that is resonated with the program. And I'm a big advocate of, look, if you're good enough to leave from high school, go from high school. But I think it should be mandatory to stay in school for 3 years. And the only reason I would say that is because it's time we implement some kind of revenue sharing program. And Jay, we talk about this all the time. The NBA has a revenue sharing program that if it's not broke, you don't need to fix it. It's already implemented. It could be the same strategy that we can have on the collegiate level. And then as a kid, all of a sudden, I feel like I'm being rewarded for seeing a program make so much money off my name, my likeness, all these things, the NCAA tournament. Now, all of a sudden, I'm more incentivized to be there and stay there and want to be a part of the school.
You said that 15 years ago the game was maybe at its best. I think of the glory days of the Big East. And I agree that the shot clock, we've got to knock it down to 25 seconds, 24 seconds, whatever you want. We've got to increase pace of play. But we talk about physical play and freedom of movement, all those things. 15 years ago, that was probably the glory days of the Big East. Lou Carnesecca, John Thompson, Jim Boeheim, all of these great coaches. And that's great. But those games were, I'm telling you, those were rock fights. You drew a line in the sand each and every play.
We can go back and look at the tape. They weren't.
I coached in the games.
I'm telling you, I've done all this stuff. And we remember them that way because that's the way the game was at the time. But if you look at it now, there's more bumping and grabbing and holding now than there was back then. Patrick Ewing and the Hoyas intimidated you by blocking your shot. They were not there taking charges and grabbing you when you're making a cut and all that stuff. They called fouls back then. And it was more physical because when there were hard blockouts and all that stuff, it was every bit as physical in that regard. But it's more physical now in trying to run an offense. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I think scouting's improved. But, you had to guard Ralph Sampson.
I was on the floor at the same time.
Well, I
didn't guard him. I gave the Van Gundy thing. Right? I was around his leg.
The waist to the leg. But when you went out to defend him, besides grabbing him by the leg, what were your game plan? All right, Jay, you've got Ralph. What was the first thing Coach K said? Get what? Get him off what? Meet
him early and knock him off get him off the spot that he wanted on the.
So basically, you chucked the cutters. That was the philosophy of defending him.
No, you met him up at the free throw line or top of the key. You had to try to beat your assignment down the floor. But I hear what you're saying. But I'm telling you, when back cuts were made, when you could not chuck a cutter like you can now, you just couldn't do it. Those things were called fouls. Now nobody set ball screens back then,
right.
So it was a little bit different in that regard. So it wasn't as physical in the amount of ball screens that were set, but there were a bunch of screens set, and it is way more physical on normal action now than it was back then because coaches have figured it out. They know that the referees, like the one thing in all this data you look at, scoring has gone up and down depending on when the three-point shot came in, the shot clock, all that stuff. Everything has fluctuated. The one thing that has stayed constant over the last 50 years has been number of fouls called per game. It is a straight line. No matter what happens in the game, the referees call the same number of fouls. So the coaches say, well, we'll just foul more. They're not going to call them.
Don't you remember last year, because we talked about this so much, last year at the beginning of the year, they were actually calling a ton of fouls. They weren't allowing freedom of movement. They were calling fouls like that, right? And then once we came into conference play, then all of a sudden all these refs went back to the way they've been calling conference games.
So yeah, a little bit. A little bit. I mean,
how do you get that feels?
It is all in the officials.
Well, like, so then how about how the game is taught, how the game is coached, trying to make it the best game?
People are always going to do that. Like the officials say that all the time. Look, I sympathize with the officials and empathize with them. They have a tough job. But coaches have a tough job, players have a tough job. So what? Everybody's got a tough job. Big deal. But it's kind of like saying if you don't guard the vault, that people are going to steal money out of there. They shouldn't do that. They shouldn't steal money out of there. These guys are competing. They're going to do whatever they can to get an edge. So the officials are the law of the court. Nobody is stopping them. They don't have any opponent getting in their way to see the fouls. Call the fouls. And we had the charge block thing. The officials complained about it. Some of the coaches complained about it. We gave up after a year. A year. And now we're back in our collision sport. We're having all these collisions under the rim.
So who gets to determine what should be acceptable then? It shouldn't be the referees determining what's acceptable and how a game's called. It should be the guys who administer the rules.
That's a fair point. But even under the current rules, they're not being implemented properly. Like there is no way that you can chuck these cutters. Those are fouls. They're just not being called. And that's where officials need to be held accountable. Now, I'm not saying, I think the officials would be happier being held accountable to that kind of standard. And what I think should happen is we have to hire these officials. They're independent contractors right now. We've got the money to hire all these officials. The big conferences can pony up and hire the officials. That means that the smaller conferences aren't going to get access to better officials. Sorry. You know, those aren't the games that are driving the bus here.
And also, Jay, officials aren't calling 4 or 5 games in 1 week. I mean, the travel schedule they have is out of control.
Right, but at least if they're salaried employees with benefits, then they're gonna be all in on this thing, and then you get to tell them what to do. Right now, we can't tell them what to do.
I think the other problem is the players of the players. I mean, like you say you can't blame it on the players, but when I think of those good teams, I mean, Ewing and Mullen and the great players in the ACC, they weren't there for 6 months. They were juniors. They were seniors. They were invested in the team. They were invested in winning. They were invested in each other. They'd been coached for 4 years. Like you were talking to Fred about when you first went to the league and how young your team was in trying to learn the triangle. We're seeing a Duke team, really talented, 3 freshmen, a Kentucky team. Our game is kind of being controlled by these young players, yet there are teams that are invested every year that maybe from other conferences that have made a couple of runs because
one thing we have to do, we're going to sit down together and we're going to watch the '85 championship game between Georgetown and Villanova, the 2 Big East powers, and it'll look like ballet compared to now. It will.
You know, it is funny. If you go back even farther than that, and one of my favorite games ever is that famous 1974 North Carolina State-Maryland game. Nobody touched anybody.
Didn't come close to anybody.
Played. And if they did,
they blocked your shot, got a steal, you know, made shots, made passes, and all that, the way the game's supposed to be played.
Okay, so we're running out of time. We're going to talk about this throughout the year, but I'm going to get the last word here. Shorten the shot clock. Enough.
Please.
Boom. Boom. Boom.
8 plays. You can run 8 plays in 1 shot clock.
What they're counting around, this is only 8 seconds. Watch a guy do this for 17. Shorten the shot clock. Going to ESPN.